The aircraft I'm going to talk about today is our replica of the P-26 Peashooter. Now, the P-26 has a very interesting place in history at a time when history was not being particularly kind to pretty much anybody. During the Great Depression, our military wasn't broke, but it was close. So it was very difficult to get new equipment and even harder to pay for really good equipment. One of those circumstances is the U.S. Army's last biplane fighter. That's what I'm standing in front of. I know I called it a biplane fighter. That's because this was designed to have a top wing. When the Boeing company brought this aircraft, this brand new fighter, to the Army said, there's a problem. Our budget won't allow us to spend $10,000 per airplane. It's just too much. There has to be some way that we can get a good fighter for less than that. We just can't afford a $10,000 machine right now. So the Boeing company, in their great wisdom, looked at their biplane fighter and said, rip, ta-da! They just took the top wing off. They didn't make a lot of other changes. They did add additional bracing because there wasn't anything else to brace the wing to. So you end up with all the best characteristics of a biplane, but without any of the support that extra wing actually provides, like a box structure, and it provides a lot of stability. So if you take that off, you have to replace it somehow. They didn't really have a good method to do that, so they just put these flying wires and they hold the wings on in high G maneuvers with those flying wires. And flying wires are great. They sound wonderful. If you're ever flying in an aircraft that has them, it makes the very distinct, almost a singing or a musical tone as you fly with this particular setup. But it's a workaround for not having that top wing. And it meant that the performance of this aircraft was really not very good. But it does count as the Army's first low-wing monoplane, all metal. It did have fabric-covered surfaces at one time, but I think as part of the production, they did away with the fabric surfaces. So this was the pride of the 30s until the P-36, the Hawk series came out, and later the P-40. This is what the generation that was going to fight in World War II, this is what the senior pilots would actually have learned on in the 1930s. Now, our machine was built in our basement by our volunteers. It took them it was either 12 or 13 years to build this aircraft from scratch. My part in the actual build was, I was the driver to drive up to Aircraft Spruce and the other companies up in Los Angeles to purchase the metal for it. I'd bring it back here, and over time they would take these flat sheets of metal that I delivered and they'd bend it in various ways into fitting into the shape of a P-26. One thing that's different about this than most of the aircraft in the building, it does share a feature with most of the racing planes in the building, and that's this. It's not a cowling, although most people would look at this and that's how they would describe it. There's a difference. This type of engine and this type of covering is called a speed ring. And each speed ring only fits one engine. They're not interchangeable. You can't take it to the plane next to you. They would build one for that engine because there's small, subtle changes on every engine. Even if you're mass producing in the 20s and 30s, it's not going to be an exact fit. So if you're flying in a racing plane or an early military plane like this, they would come up with a special speed ring. This is the most difficult thing we've ever built. We've done it for a couple of aircraft, and to build a speed ring for a specific engine is what I would consider now kind of a lost art. There's very, very few people that knew how to do it, even back in the 30s. And now 100 years later, it's very difficult to find somebody that has the know-how and the tools necessary to build one of these speed rings. So the speed ring on this is an interesting feature because it's also a separator between the engine and the guns. The guns on this is very interesting. You can't believe our sign because it's a little off. Our sign says that it has a 50 millimeter and a 30 millimeter, and the truth is it has a 50 caliber and a 30 caliber. That's a difference of a factor of about 10. So although our science says it's very well armed with a cannon and a heavy machine gun, in reality, the P-26 Peashooter was just that. It was very, very lightly armed. You'll notice the sight. At the time, they thought a telescopic sight would help you shoot down a bomber because you could see it far enough away. In practice, that is completely useless. The Germans tried it too. Adolf Galland, the general of fighters, had one of those systems installed on his Bf-109, and after 2 flights, he said, "Get that thing off my plane." You can't really shoot at a bomber through the old-fashioned telescope that mariners used, and that's the aviation equivalent of that. So it really shows just how early of a plane this was, and that we hadn't really worked out the bugs yet of what the next air war was going to be like. So the actual guns, if you come to the front of the aircraft, you can see that the 30 caliber is on the left side of the machine, and the 50 caliber, a much larger machine gun that does count as a heavy machine gun. It's mounted to fire through the boss of the propeller using that interrupter gear that we talked about. Same system. Anytime that the gun barrels were occluded, if they were blocked by the propeller, there's a mechanical cutout in there that would keep the machine gun from firing for that 1 minute, or for that 1 microsecond. So as soon as the propeller blade passed, the machine gun would fire again. So this is what America started the 30s with, and it holds a distinction of being probably the most out-of-place machine at the attack on Pearl Harbor. There were a handful of these and P-36 Hawks that were still on duty in a reserve function at the base. In fact, one of those Curtiss Hawks made it into the sky and actually shot down one of the attackers that day. I'm grateful that none of these made it off the ground during that attack. It was our first experience with the Japanese Zero, and it didn't go very well. We had no idea that aircraft existed. We hadn't had reports yet of anybody fighting them. Pearl Harbor was our wake-up in that regard. This aircraft would not have fared well. I can't say that a highly motivated person couldn't have done some damage with it. There is an actual report from the Philippines where a captain in the Philippine Air Force used one of these to shoot down one of the attackers, I believe over Clark Field. So you could take it into battle in World War II, but think this over. Some of these were still on duty when the war started. For me, World War II started in 1936 or 37 when Japan started on China. 1940, 1939, Europe was already involved. But into late 1941, early 42, the Chinese government still had these things as operational fighters. Now, that's 1942. Above us is the Me-262 fighter. The Me-262 fighter was built starting in 1942. So there's a chance somewhere on the planet these are flying at the same time the prototype of the Me-262 jet fighter was flying. It's a real good example of how fast technology moves ahead in wartime. And of all the aircraft that we have in the building, we have a couple that I think should never have been used in combat. This guy is definitely one of them. It was apparently very fun to fly. We painted ours in the colors of the local National Guard unit that used to fly these here in the San Diego and Southern California area back in the late 30s. So it's painted up exactly like one. We have a photograph of our building with a flight of these aircraft flying over the top of it. So it made the choice very easy when we were looking for a paint scheme for our machine. We knew exactly which one we wanted to copy. One thing I wanted to add is this aircraft is a display aircraft. We didn't build it for flight. We built it for children and families to come and enjoy. These tires are a nightmare to get on and off. One of the things that the design didn't do very well, they wanted a high-speed landing gear, a fixed landing gear that could actually help them with speed. So they made it very aerodynamic. This fairing, the wheel pants, is probably one of the best designed as far as minimizing drag. The however comma is, if you blow a tire, this is an all-day sucker to get that thing off. And it's a pain. It is a real pain to get the wheels into this. So what they ended up doing here at the museum, they didn't want to have to change these. They didn't want the tires to go flat and we end up with a machine that doesn't present very well on the floor. So our workaround, our geniuses in the basement, came up with a mold to make the world's largest skateboard tire. This is a polyethylene. It's exactly like a skateboard wheel. And we have a mold in the basement, and that's how we fix the problem. We'll never have to change it because that's a solid wheel. It's never going to go flat on us. It's such a neat workaround that other museums have reached out to us. Other people that have P-26s on display have reached out and said, can we borrow your mold? So we've actually made a couple of sets of these tires for other people. So that's one of the very few things that we did to make a presentable change on an aircraft. Normally we don't do that. We're not going to get that creative on most of our designs, but just because of how much effort it takes to get into that wheel pant, to get the wheel off, that's why we did it this way.